thing. So you have to click on that and we'll just keep going. And a reminder to mute yourself. So we can keep the background noise down and make it easier for us to not have to do that. For those of you that, let's see, I'm hearing echoes. For those of you that are members, thank you. For those of you that are not, please consider joining. We've been doing this now actively for about 18 months, and we're rebuilding the Western Wood Carvers on the history of 50 years worth of effort for a lot of people. And I'll acknowledge Tony Rizzuto, who is online, who was the former president and a long-term leader, and others of you have been members of the Western Wood Carvers. We do monthly programs except in December. We might do a December program, it'll be a special, but right now we don't plan on one. November 9th, our programs are always the second Tuesday. November 9th is featuring a guy named Eric Owens, who is a leader in the Idaho Carvers Guild and an instructor and teacher there. He's been teaching for well over a decade and does all of the classes that are taught at Woodcraft in Idaho. He's been to Salem and teaching, and he teaches elsewhere as well. But his topic is on tips and techniques for carvers, basically a whole bunch of experience things that he's picked up. So please consider that. We have some classes coming up. Terry Burnside is teaching a Santa carving class on 2 sessions, November 6th and 13th. There's 1 slot left. The 6th version of the Max Sutter relief carving class is coming up October 30th through December 4th. There's some openings there. And then I'm doing the experimental monthly incise carving class. I got one Saturday, but it's too late to get involved with that. The next one is November 20th. And our goal is to do beginner classes for free on a predictable rotating schedule and to try to get to the point where we can do 1 a week. Right now we're experimenting with incise carving. So Roger, someone's got an echo going on.
I'm not hearing an echo on my side.
Don't you? Interesting. Okay.
Does Janice, do you hear an echo?
Not right now. From time to time, I'm getting a little bit of an echo.
Okay. I've got everyone muted, I believe.
Okay.
This is Yvonne, and I'm getting an echo, and I noticed there's a couple people that aren't muted.
Okay, it looks like Roger's on top of it. Looks like everybody is except for the demonstrator view. We'll see. And okay, we'll keep going. We're gonna, this is the first time in the 18 months that we've had show and tell as a standard feature as part of every program. So we're doing some experimentation tonight. We'll get better at it. And but if you have something that you're doing that you could show and tell, please consider for next month. We'd like to get photos ahead of time so we can queue them up and we can get higher quality. That's not the case in every case, but Roger, I'd like to have you spotlight Ray Curtis, and Ray will show first, and then Ray would just make a comment, if you will, about Elisa's class so that people know what that is.
Oh, you're muted, Ray.
There we go. All right, so this is I think she called it a salt box. And it's basically just a lidded box that we took a piece of plywood or a piece of walnut and went ahead and carved a very thin lid off of it. Actually bandsawed the lid off. And then went ahead and Lisa showed us how to carve the interior so that it would have a nice interior. And like that. And so I got a nice finished edge here, unfinished edge, and then the 3 other sides. Now I haven't finished this yet, I haven't put a finish on it. It's got a brass hinge on it. It's got a brass hinge on it because when I started out, I was more worried about my edges and getting them straight and organized, and forgot to put a space for my hinge. So I ended up putting in a brass hinge.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Roger, I highlight Tom Rich. And Tom, I'll share just unmute yourself and I'll share your photos. Tom, Ray and I were guinea pigs in Elise Miller's class. She calls it a salt dip, but they're tiny boxes and they're wide. There can be a wide variety. The ones you're going to see are similar because this was part of the prototype. So can you see that box, Tom?
Yes,
Okay. Why don't you just comment on that on your design?
it starts off as a little cube of walnut with a live edge. I dyed the live edge black, and if you look at it closely, it has a nice diagonal pattern in it. The rest of it is just flat walnut. Instead of a brass hinge, I turned a little button. It's a dowel with a button on the end. And the next slide shows the box open. And I did leave a little triangle under the button to give it enough strength to hold the lid. The lid is very thin. I finished up to 600 grit sandpaper and then used a mineral oil carnauba wax combination to finish the wood. The wood itself has some wormholes and that sort of thing, which are just character. They're great. It's great to have that character and also character for the live edge. So it was a fun project.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Elise will be, this is a non-traditional carving. It's not caricatures, and it's kind of, it's unique and interesting, and the live edge wood makes a real choice, but she'll be doing more of that, and we want to support her on it. Let's see, I don't know. Let's see, Bob, I'll go with you. I don't know if I can see if Joanne is on. Let me just take, I don't see her.
I'm
So
on.
Bob, are
I'm
you?
on,
Thank
Larry.
you. Thank you, Joanne. I'm going to do Bob next, and then then you'll be right after that, Joanne.
Wood burning.
There you go, Bob. Want to comment on yours?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yep.
This is my background is decorative bird carving, and I worked with Don Bayer a lot, and competed in the what is it called, the Columbia Flyway competition. And I started doing something different. This was the first that I've done this type of thing. I've done leaves before and I've done birds before, but never the combination. And what it is a block of Tupelo that's probably about 4 inches thick. And the reason I made it 4 inches thick is that if you start messing up, you can just go down another layer. So it takes some of the stress out of it. And what else? I'm trying to figure out what to do with burning on it. I wanted to add some burning pyrography to it. And that's not my forte other than feathers. So that's primarily why I'm really looking forward to this lecture. Anyway, it's a work in progress.
Thank you, Bob. These are the same carving, or are they just?
Yeah, one's with a flash
image.
so that you can see
Yeah.
a little bit different. The other is with top lighting so that the texture shows up a little bit better.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Joanne, let's see, I've got, I'm going to remove a spotlight, Roger. I don't know who's on. I'm going to go to Joanne Carroll next. And Joanne, here we go. Just a minute, I gotta find it. Where did it go? There we go. So you see the bighorn sheep?
Yep.
Okay, so go ahead, Joanne, why don't you explain
Well,
your,
I started taking animal carving with a number of instructors, and my first carving was a lion's head, but I was too chicken to burn. I didn't have a burner, and I was afraid to do it. So this bighorn sheep was the first one that I actually burned, and I have a habit of burning every single fur hair that you could want. Everybody tells me that when you touch my carving, you can actually feel the fur. But the fun was, in the antlers, not only were the lines of the segments burned, but then by taking a shader, I was able to put a little bit of a gloss on it so that it made it look like it was a higher gloss horn than a fur piece. This is a little koala, and he's also burned, but he's also painted on top. So I burned it, and then I started painting it, and I realized that I hadn't burned it dark enough. So I had to go back in and burn it again and then paint over it with a light wash. And so that's a burning with paint. This is a leaping lynx, and likewise, it's a burning as well as paint, diluted paint, very diluted paint, so that it seeps into the wood. And you can see that if you touch it, it will feel like fur.
I can see it.
And this is a tiger head that I burned. I wasn't real happy with it. I learned a lot by doing it. And I learned more about burning longer hair. Around the muzzle and everything, the hair is so short. But then the further away you get, you want it to look long, and you can see by the neck that it really wasn't long enough hair to really give you the effect of a heavy coat.
and Joanne, how long have you been burning?
Only about 10 years.
Only 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's just a sitting red fox. It's a lot of fun. I got a little bit better at burning longer hair, as you can see in the tail. And then, of course, it was painted over. And then I also do a lot of bark carving. So these were a couple of bark carvings, and burners help a lot with bark carving because you can use it to define the edges of the windows and the doors. And of course, you can see it also gives the texture of the stones and the bricks. And so it's really kind of, it gives it the depth that you want at different points in the carving.
Thank you, Joanne. And where do you live?
I live in San Jose, California.
Yeah, I knew that, but the others may not. We'll see. Oh, you did. You have your name. So Roger, I'm going to switch it to you, and you can
Okay,
do your show and tell. Then after that, you have the con.
Would not want to.
okay, so I don't have the artistic capability that Joanne has, but I do a lot of pyrography, and hopefully you can see this bowl here.
Yes.
Okay, so this is called Basket Illusions. And basically it's, you turn a bowl, you put a bunch of beads on it. In this case, it's there's 17 or 18 rows of beads. And you blacken between them with a pyrography pen. And the nice thing about about burning is that when you go to color these, the burn keeps it from bleeding into the next bead here. So there's a couple of these. That's the back, and the basket illusion is called basket illusions because the front and the back are supposed to be duplicates. So it's like you're weaving a basket. There's another one. And then also, this is a small box, and the black lines are painted, but they're outlined with a burner. The burner puts a little groove in there and keeps the, when you paint the black on there, it keeps the black from bleeding into the next color. And the dots here are stippling with a round headed tip on the pyrography pen. There's a couple different ones. And then this is basically the same stippling with the same tip here, and then just trying my artistic best here to burn a tree in. And that's where I need a little more expertise in drawing and stuff. But so I think tonight you'll see a number of examples of how to use pyrography to enhance your projects. And Janice came to us a couple years ago and did a live demonstration with the Turning Club, Northwest Wood Turners. And she gave a demonstration Thursday night and then had 2 days of classes with us following that to show her technique. So I was happy that she was able to join us remotely for tonight. And I guess I'll turn it over to Janice. You can tell us a little bit about yourself. And hopefully everyone who signed up for tonight did get a chance to take a look at her website to see some examples of her work, but I think she'll show us some more tonight. So Janice, the show is
Okay,
yours.
thank you, Roger. I want to thank both you and Larry for inviting me to join you this evening. And I really want to thank wood carvers in general, because it was about 10 years ago that I was at the Wood Turning Club that I'm a member of in Waco, was invited to take part in the Wood Carvers 1 day long session of pyrography. I had not done pyrography at that time. It seemed like a very interesting thing to do. And I went, I enjoyed it, and I have really been enjoying pyrography ever since. Now, as far as the wood carving goes, my wood carving is limited more to relief carving. I do power carving, not so much those other tools that you might really cut yourself on. Tonight, though, we're going to talk a little bit about different techniques in wood burning. And to start out, actually, pyrography, wood burning, is an ancient art. For many years, hundreds, thousands perhaps of years, across the world, natives have enjoyed using pyrography to enhance their pottery, to enhance cave paintings. Generally, the process was stick a stick in the fire, temper it, get a little carbon buildup on the end, and poke it onto a piece of pottery to create some designs, and some beautiful, beautiful designs they were able to create. After electricity came upon the scene, we had and I'll bring one right over here. You can see this. We had these earlier types of wood burners. Some of you are familiar with these. They're little more than a soldering iron. And they have a rather large burning tip on them that's very slow to heat up and very slow to cool down. But for those people who started burning with this kind of instrument, I have seen some of the most gorgeous pyrography work that you could ever wish to see. When I was invited by that club, the wood carving club, to come over and take a class, this is the kind of wood burner that I took with me. After a little bit of time trying to use it, the instructor came over to me and he said, I think you're going to be happier with an adjustable temperature machine. So I'm just going to put this machine right over here, and we'll sort of switch cameras there so we can see this machine a little better. The adjustable temperature machine, this one happens to be by Coalwood. allows me to actually burn very, very hot or very, very cool. And that is the advantage of this machine over the soldering iron type of machine, which just has one temperature. Now, recently, in years past, companies have been putting a little rheostat down in the extension cord, but it's still not as quality a machine, I don't think, as the adjustable temperature machine. Let me move this back over to the side. We're going to be doing a little bit more with that in just a few moments. I'm glad that some of you had an opportunity to look at my website and look at some of the things that I've done over the years. I've added a few slides that I wanted to talk about because in each one of the slides, we've got a bit of pyrography and a technique that we'll be talking about later this evening. In this first one, there it is. There's the carving down at the bottom. Actually, I did not even do the carving. This is a collaborative effort. And one of my good friends, Linda Ferber, did the carving and did the color of the leaves at the bottom. Then it was mailed on to me, and I added the pyrographic designs on the outside of the bowl and on the inside of the bowl. And I did not include a slide that showed the inside of the bowl. I think that may be on my website. This wood is Bradford pear, and it's a particularly nice wood to burn on because of the even grain. This particular piece combines a little bit of fantasy or whimsy with what might normally be a more realistic piece. Notice the background. I've used a stippling technique. That's that little round ball that Roger was talking about that you just dab into the wood to create one of the kinds of backgrounds that can be created. I think I missed one. All right, there we go. This one, I did this on poplar, and you would not normally think that poplar is a good wood to burn, but it certainly can be. And if you can get your hands on the white poplar, it is particularly nice, I think, to burn. In this particular one, no color was added. Just by adjusting the temperature of the burner itself, you're able to create a lot of variety. You're able to create some depth in the design. And then another little secret that we're going to talk about later is creating highlights by using white colored pencil. This little piece, I've combined a lot of very, very, very dark background with the stippling technique. And then I have used different temperatures, a lot of variety in the temperatures that I've used in order to create patterns on the wood. And this particular piece of wood is maple. This is box elder, a little bit of the flame showing at the top. Very little use of color, and I'm saying the word color, although pyrography variation here. Very little use of a variety of temperature settings on this one, although between the little flowers, a bit of the black stippling to create some background. This one, however, a whole lot of temperature, and this is on poplar again. I've actually used one of the shading tips to actually carve into the wood. This is a technique that a lot of wood turners will use. It's not one that I often use, but I thought I needed to go ahead and experiment with it a little bit. The little round circles are all created by using ball tips that are carving tips. This one, again, a technique using a lot of temperature variation, black stippling, and some white colored pencil for highlight. Okay, you can also do gourds. This is probably not one of the better ones, but it's, I don't do a lot of gourds, but certainly pyrography can be done on gourds as well. Color. I like to introduce a lot of really brilliant color into some of my pyrography work. The designs here are Zentangle inspired. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the term Zentangle. It was introduced several years ago, and all of the adult coloring books that came on the market over the last few years are a result of this Zentangle inspired art technique. It's simply just geometric patterns, usually the same pattern that's just over and over and over, reproduced over and over and over. And it's supposed to create a feeling of zen or relaxation. That would be up to the user, I'm sure. This piece measures about 15 by 15, and it uses just the pyrography. It's done on cottonwood, and I had this piece of wood for quite a long time before I finally could decide what I wanted to do with it. And the bark on it sort of reminded me of feathers. So I thought to create this, and I call him the old warrior of the plains. There are a lot of cracks in the wood, and so the wrinkles in his face sort of give that look of age. A lot of texturing in the wood that I just ignored. Normally we want a clean slate, as clean a slate on the wood as possible. But for this particular piece of wood, I didn't mind the cracks. I didn't mind the variance in color at all. I think it just sort of added to the finished piece. And you have to have a little fun with your wood turning, wood burning, or perhaps even wood carving. And yes, that little stem on the apple is carved. This again, a Zentangle inspired with a little bit of whimsy added to it and a little bit of color added to the little apple. All right. Now, you've got your wood burner with you, and I've already said that I actually prefer the adjustable temperature wood burner, but then you're going to have some tips as well. The tips that I particularly like to use are the writing tip, and in this case, this is a ball tip. Now, there are the manufacturers have 3 different sizes of ball tips. They'll have a really small one. This is the 1.6 millimeter, and then there's one that's a little bit larger. My favorite tip is this mid-sized one. The tiny tip, which they're going to advertise as being their writing tip, is not good on softer woods. If you have a very, very dense wood like a hard maple, then that tiny tip works okay. Otherwise, the tip just digs into the wood, and I don't think you're going to be happy with the result. Let me talk to you a little bit about the machine that I'm using. There are 3 that I think of that are the big manufacturers right now on the market. This one is a coal wood, then there's the razor tip, and then there's the Burn Master. The Burn Master is a high wattage machine. That means that the heat recovery is very, very quick with the Burn Master. There are 2 different types, and I'm going to turn my machine on and show you a little bit of that. There are 2 different types of wood burning that you're probably going to use. I've already alluded a little bit to each one of them. I mentioned that I do a lot of stippling, and I can stipple with this ball. I can use this medium-sized one, or I can use a big one. And stippling is a type of branding. Branding is simply holding the tip into the wood to create a burn pattern. Branding usually creates a little bit of smoke, so let's talk about safety for a moment. If you're going to be doing some branding where you know you've got some smoke, set yourself up a fan a couple of feet away and draw the smoke away from you. You don't want to have the fan blow across the tip because it will actually cool the tip. Now, the other type of burning that I've alluded to just a little bit is artistic burning, and it doesn't mean you have to be an artist to do it. It simply means that you move the tip across the wood. So we have branding and we have artistic burning. These are the two that you're going to be using primarily. Actually, those are the only two. If there's another kind, I don't know what it is. Now, let's talk a bit about the types of machines that you might choose. And I didn't bring photos of them, but I feel that certainly some people in your club already have the Burnmaster. It's the big red machine. It's excellent for branding, but because the handle is rather large and it's literally just about the size of this soldering iron type handle, and the burning tip is a little bit further away from your fingers than on some of the other pyrography machines. I like the Burnmaster, but for artistic burning, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit because even Burnmaster has made some adjustments in their machines of the last couple of years. But for artistic burning, I think you might be happier with either the razor tip or the coal wood. And we'll talk a bit about the razor tip. The razor tip and the coal wood are comparably priced machines, and both of them are a little bit less expensive than the Burnmaster. But remember, the Burnmaster is a higher wattage machine, and therefore the cost is going to be a little bit more. One of the cons, I think, about the razor tip is that you have to purchase the entire handle and tip as one unit. And these run in the neighborhood of about $25 to $30 each. So if you're going to have several of these, you can see that just by purchasing the handles and the tips, that combination, you're going to run into a little extra money there. The coal wood machine that I use, I came by very scientifically. That class that I took, when the teacher came over with the machine, it was a coal wood. And so this was the first adjustable temperature machine that I had ever been introduced to. And I went home that afternoon and told my husband about it. He ordered me online one exactly like the one I've had in class. And here sits this same machine that I've had for the last 10 years. So it's been an excellent machine. This one happens to be a 2-port. I've got a heavier duty extension cord on one side, lighter duty on the other. And simply by switching from one side to the other, I can do some branding. Actually, I can brand with this one, but the heat recovery is a little bit faster if I switch to the higher wattage side. The thing that I like about the handles on this one, as opposed to the razor tip, is that this one has either an option of having the fixed tip in the handle, or I can get the replaceable tips for the handle. And it's just a real easy little process. I use my little handy dandy puller here, and I pull that tip out. And then I simply, whoop, that one's still hot. I knew that one was still hot because I'm going to put it right back in again. And then I can just replace the tip that quickly. You always want to turn the machine off when you're replacing the tips, though, just to save on the tips. Now, let's talk about, Burnmaster. I told you I did want to go back and mention Burnmaster. During the last several years, the Burnmaster has come out with adapters that come with the Burnmaster kit when you purchase it. And you literally can use either a coal wood or a razor tip handle with the Burnmaster machines now. And because the Burnmaster is calibrated to a higher wattage, there's a little hole right here by the rheostat on the new Burnmasters. They even include a tiny little screwdriver. You can insert that little screwdriver and you can recalibrate your rheostat to a lower setting if you want to. And then when you're doing branding, you can crank it right back up again. So all of the machines have now begun to listen to what the various users want. Even now, the razor tip and the Coalwood have now come out with higher wattage machines than the Super Pro 2, which is the one I've been using for 10 years. Now, the other things that you're going to want to use, of course, are your burning tips. So let's look at a few of the tips that are available that I particularly like to use. And you can see I really am a fan of those replaceable tips. The little skew here looks just about like a wood turning skew. It's very thin. And we're going to look at exactly what this is used for in a few moments. There are several different shaders, different looks in shaders. This one is called a spoon shader because it looks like a little spoon. A flat nose shader. This one has a bit more of a curved, not quite pointed tip on it, but it too is a shader. This last little tip is a Coalwood tip, and I don't know if any of the other manufacturers are creating this. Coalwood calls it a J. It's very, very thin, like the skew, but it's rounded on the end. And I heard one of the gentlemen mention that he enjoyed doing fins. So if you're doing fish fins or feathers, this tip is excellent for creating very, very thin, delicate lines. And no matter how you hold it to the wood, and we'll be demonstrating this in a little bit, the same amount of the burning tip is on the wood at all times. So you're not getting a lot of overburn. It's a very, very consistent burn for those thin, thin lines that you're going to want to be doing. Some other things that you might find are useful are pencils. I particularly like the 4B artist pencil. You can, of course, use a regular number 2 pencil, but the number 2 pencil has a harder lead in it, and you have the opportunity to sort of dent the wood, and you may not want to be denting the wood. So the 4B, which is a softer lead, doesn't tend to dent the wood as much, and I think you're going to be happier. A 6B puts a little bit more graphite on the wood than I care to put onto the wood. Graphite paper. Most of us are familiar with the regular graphite paper, which is this dark color on one side. But there are some other graphite papers that are also available, and I don't suppose they're really graphite, but we'll call them that. The white graphite paper, if you happen to be tracing a pattern onto a dark wood, then this shows up a little bit better than the darker graphite. And then this blue that's called charcoal paper is really nice. This works particularly well on light colored woods. And the thing about this that's so nice is that when you get ready to clean up after you've done all of your burning, a slightly, barely damp cloth, you just wipe this away and it goes away. You don't have to erase it or sand it off. You just wipe it with a damp cloth and the blue is gone. So 3 different kinds of graphite that you can use if you're going to be transferring a pattern to your wood. It's always you'll need a little bit of sandpaper, and your sandpaper is for several things. At the end, once you have already transferred all of your pattern in pyrography to the wood, you'll be using a little bit of the sandpaper for cleanup. Sandpaper is also an option if you're using one of these kinds of wood burners. This is very handy for cleaning the tips. Now, this tip is a big beefy tip, and the sandpaper is not going to create a lot of long-term damage to this tip. But when you're using something like one of these little thin skews, you are not going to want to use sandpaper. Instead, I like to use one of these soft brass bristle brushes to clean the tips. And you're going to need to clean your tips often because you're going to get some carbon buildup on the tips. The sandpaper, and we'll talk about this too, is useful in correcting mistakes, but we'll get to that in just a little while. You'll need some rulers, and then if you're going to add color, you can use all sorts of dyes, water-based dyes, alcohol-based dyes, India ink. I use a lot of markers with what I do. I like the Prisma markers and I like the Copic markers. None of these are as UV resistant or as light resistant in direct sunlight as some of the dyes would be. So if you're planning to create something that is going to really be light resistant for a long period of time, you may want to look at the India inks or some of the dyes. One of the things that I do like about using the markers, however, are these blenders. I can literally lay down 2 or 3 colors together. Now, this one happens to be an artist loft. Copic makes blenders and Prisma makes blenders, but these actually will blend the colors together. So one reason why I really like using markers. You also can use, interestingly, colored pencils. I like the Prisma colored pencils or the Derwent colored pencils. These are a little bit better quality than some of the others. And colored pencils can be blended with your Prisma, Artist Loft or Copic blenders as well. Okay, so those are just some of the pieces of equipment that you're going to find useful. Now let's get into doing some actual burning. Years ago, when I first started with my pyrography, the bent wire was the writing tip. And I did have the bent wire, but then the balls were introduced, and I really, really prefer the balls more. The bent wire is wider on one side, narrower on the other, and how you hold it in your hand does make a difference as to the quality of the burn. When you're using a ball tip, then the diameter of the ball is the same no matter how you hold it in your hand. Writing tip, it's called a writing tip for a purpose. The forte of this particular tip is to make curved lines. I can try let's go ahead and try making straight lines. And I encourage you, when you get your own wood burner out, to try making some straight lines with your ball tip. And normally the process is we set it down onto the wood, and then we do something like this, and then we pick it up. And we really don't have anything very attractive there. We've got a big blob at the beginning, a blob where I stopped momentarily, and a blob at the end. So what caused that? I'm holding this tip, or I'm holding this handle just like I would a pencil. I was writing just like I would with a pencil. Well, there's a huge difference between using a pen or pencil and using a pyrography writing tip. Pyrography is painfully slow. In order to get a burn that's consistent, remember the heat is being dispersed into the wood. I have to wait on my machine to recover the heat. So that means I've got to slow down the motion very, very, very slowly. So I'll plop it down, I'll slow down. Okay, well, so maybe that's a little bit better, but I still have a big blob at the beginning. How in the world do you avoid that? Think about a pilot who's practicing touch and goes down at the airport. When you're practicing your touch and goes, you head toward the runway, you gently touch down, gently kissing that runway. Then you're slowing down as you're going down the runway, and then you're gently picking back up again. So let's try that with our burn. I'm going to gently come in and touch that wood, slow down as I move down the runway, and then pick it back up again. Therefore, I've got a little bit more of a consistent burn throughout, and I don't have the blob at the beginning and the end. This is probably the most difficult technique to practice and to learn and to use consistently. After 10 years, I'll be darned if I still won't plop this thing down and create a nice big blob at the beginning. So what I'd like for you to do, if you're taking some notes, or even if you have your wood burner with you and you're going to want to practice along with me, is I want you to, first of all, I want you to go across the grain. I want you to go diagonally to the grain. And then I want you to go with the grain. Now, I hope that you notice that I turned the wood. I did not turn my body inside out. Turn the wood instead of your body. Keep your position comfortable, and keep your hand position comfortable when you're burning. Now, we're going to notice right away that with this tip, if we're going across the grain or even diagonally with the grain, the little grain is going to argue with us a bit. We're going to get a bit of a bumpity bump. With the grain on a straight line, not so bad. Well, this is still called a writing tip, not a straight line drawing tip. So let's look at what we can do if we move the tip and create some circular motions here. The grain doesn't seem to argue with us quite as much when we're creating more circular motions. Notice how painfully slow I'm going. There are actually 3 ways that we can control the burn. One is by temperature, one is certainly by speed, and then the other is by pressure. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're wanting a dark burn that you should bear down on the tip. These little fellows will bend, and these little balls can be unsoldered. I actually have lost one little ball from pressing down too hard on it. So temperature and speed are probably a little bit better at controlling the burn than pressure. Now, let's look at what happens if I speed that burn up just a little bit. I'm still going at a consistent rate, but notice that the burn is a lot lighter by going just a little bit faster. So that's the second way: temperature, speed, and pressure. If I really wanted a dark burn, I can slow it way down and press really hard. And I'm really digging into the wood here. Now, I've already shown you that I can do lines with this, and we've decided that the straight line is not the forte of the writing tip, but can we do some shading with this? Yes. There are a couple of different kinds of shading that I particularly like to do with the ball tip. One is like a little scrubbing exercise. I'm going to make tiny little circles about 1/8 of an inch in diameter. And I'm going to overlap these to create a shading or a dark background. Now, invariably, I'll have my students, they'll start out making little circles, And then in a moment, they're going like this, back and forth. Notice what's happening. Every time I change direction, I get a little blob on the wood. So it's not a back and forth motion. It's a tiny little circle. I can speed this up and I can decrease my pressure and I can get a much lighter shading with this technique. The other one that I really like to use a lot is stippling, and that's branding. And that's simply where we press the tip into the wood. And I really like this technique. And I'm not going to do a lot of it because it creates a lot of smoke. And right now I don't have a fan to draw it away. But I really do like the technique of using the stippling. All right, let's look at another tip. Let's go to the skew. By the way, if any of you have questions while I'm doing this, please, ask me. Now, when I put the skew in, I don't want the card to be my enemy here. I don't want to fight with the card. With the ball tip, I could hold it any way at all. Right now, I'm fighting with this card. So I'm just going to pull this right back out again and adjust it so that it feels comfortable in my hand. Okay, that looks like that'll be just about right. Now the skew has a lot less metal in it than that ball tip. So I'm actually going to need to reduce the temperature. If you're burning red, you are shortening the life of your tip. Now, I know that some of you want to burn red because you're using one of these tips to literally carve the wood. And I understand that technique. But if you're doing more of an artistic type burning, you don't need to burn red. If you must, you can slow down, increase the temperature, press a little harder, or go over it 2 or 3 times. Now, what in the world does the skew do? Let's just plop it down and see. I'm just going to put the whole skew right down onto the, I'm branding now. So I can create little straight lines. I can come back and create little designs by just doing some branding with my skew. I'm going to again plop the whole thing down and let's see what happens. I'm just going to helicopter right in. Oh dear. The same rule applies to the skew as applied to the writing tip. You have to do the touch and go process. If you just simply plop it down, you're going to get a big blob at the beginning, a lot of overburn here, and then you're going to reduce the line as you move on rapidly past that. So let's bring it in like we're landing an airplane. Touch that runway. Now I've got the whole thing going here. So I've got a really dark line, but because I slowed down, because I landed my airplane gently and then picked it up gently, I don't have that big blob at the beginning and at the end. Now, I want a thinner line. I don't want all that dark line. I can simply rotate up toward the tip. I've got a little bit of carbon buildup here, so I'm going to clean that tip. Now, I'm not going up to the tippy tip like this, although I certainly could. I'm going to be about out on the last 1/4 of it, and let's see what happens. I'm going to speed up here a bit. I can get a much finer line by getting up onto the tip. Now let's see what happens if we go across the grain. Remember when we were using the writing tip, going across the grain didn't work very well at all. Look at that nice straight line. Some people say, I can't draw a straight line. Well, if you put a skew tip into your pyrography machine, yes, you can. And there are no little bumples along the way at all. Let's try diagonally.
Is the Cub a good starter one?
Ask that question again. I didn't understand you.
Is the Cub a good starter machine?
The Cub is only, I think, about a 28-watt machine. And I was just teaching a class this last weekend, and one of the students had the Cub, and he was having to turn it all the way up to number 10 to get much of a burn at all. I normally would have recommended the Cub until I actually saw his in action. You can get this Super Pro 2, which is a 2-port machine with the handle, the puller. I think it comes with 2 handles, a puller, and I think about 5 tips and a carrying case for, I think, $215 from MDI Wood Carvers. And I know you guys as carvers are probably familiar with that company, but they also sell the Coalwood machine. And I'm sure that if you were to go directly to Coalwood, you can get about the same price directly with Coalwood.
Thank you.
Now Coalwood does make the detailer, which is a 1-port machine, but it is higher wattage than the Cub. And I think that package runs about $155. So not too bad. Now, what else can you do with the skew? Well, I could turn it over and I could do, well, I can't really do ... because it's a little bit of a long ... Can I do a curve with the skew? Well, let's give it a try. I'm going to try to roll it in my fingers to create a curve, and I'm going to come up toward the point, because obviously I couldn't do a curve if I have the thing flat down on the wood. Now there are some wood burning people who kind of can coax a curve out of the skew a lot better than I can, I'm sure. I can do a fairly simple curve with the skew. But for me, that's not this tip's forte. This tip's forte is in making fairly straight lines. Now, you can borrow from the world of pen and ink drawings. I like doing hatching, where you can draw your lines just really close to one another. We can do a little cross hatching. And if I'm wanting to get that even darker, I can come in and go diagonally across it. And again, that is a technique for shading borrowed from pen and ink. And sometimes it's kind of fun just to do a whole burning where you're just using hatching and cross hatching to create the burn on the wood. All right. Any questions now about the skew? I'm going to turn the machine off and let's put in some shaders now to see what they can do. I'll start with a spoon shader. And again, we don't want the card to argue with us. The spoon shader we mentioned looks like a little spoon. And I have found that its forte is in creating a fairly soft shaded background. Oops. Need a little more heat than that. There we go. Again, I'm using that technique where I'm scrubbing little 1/8 of an inch circles. I'm not going back and forth. I'm going round and round, and I'm overlapping those little circles. And look what a soft little shade that does. I suppose I could just plop this down onto the, but you know, that doesn't do much for me. But there's some branding with a spoon shader. Now, something that the spoon shader will do, I'm going to flip the whole thing over. And look what a fine line I can get with this spoon shader. I can even coax a bit of a curve out of it. I had turned the heat down just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back up again. Now, the skew, I can get a perfectly straight line with my spoon shader. It doesn't automatically want to go straight, so you can get a bit of a curve out of it. But I think its forte is that soft shaded background. Now, when I'm doing shading, one of the things I like to do is sometimes I am going to kind of helicopter in instead of land this airplane. And if I helicopter in on a line that's already there, it doesn't make any difference. So if I come in and start shading here against a hard line, if I plop it down right on that hard line, you're not going to know. But if I plop it down outside that hard line, look what I've done. I've created a little spot there. So if there is a possibility to do so, then start your shading at a hard line. Now let's see about some other ways that we can shade using this. I can come to a hard line and I can pull it away briskly. And I can begin to get sort of a, well, it's almost a feathery look. Very dark at that hard line and then fading out into kind of a feathery look. So a couple of different ways that you can handle shading with your spoon shader. Let's look at some of the other shaders too. This is a square nose shader or flat nose shader. Now, this is interesting too. Last March, I was teaching a class at John Campbell, and they didn't have wood burners, and yet they wanted me to teach a wood burning class. So we were able to order, at that time we could have 6 students with the COVID situation. So we were able to order 6 Cowood kits, and 4 of the kits sent the flat nose shader with curved edges at the end, and 2 sent a flat nose shader with flat edges, just completely square at the end. I don't like that square, so I just simply took the little tips over to a grinding wheel and I ground off the corners. I rounded them off because I can get a better result if I'm not having corners digging into the wood. Now, what happens if I plop this down? I can get, I don't know if we're going to call that interesting and usable, just to plop it down or not. So let's go back and use that same little scrubbing technique. Now, if I plop the whole thing down, I can really get a burn. Or I can go over to slightly to one corner and using that same little scrubbing method, I can get a little bit of a lighter burn, much like the spoon shader. So if you're looking at which shader must I really buy, and you don't want to buy all 3 or 4 of the options, I probably would opt for, oh gee, I'm not sure, because look what you can do when you turn this one over. I can create some nice straight lines with this shader. So I think we've demonstrated that the spoon shader or the flat nose shader will both create a soft burn for background shading and will create straight lines. So you might want to get both of them, but perhaps you just want to get one. Now, we with our spoon shader did this a little bit ago, where we went right up to that hard line and pulled away from it. So let's see if we can do that with this shader as well. Now I just plop it down. And yes, I can create very close to the same effect using the spoon shader or the flat nose shader. But I'm starting at a hard line. I'm literally helicoptering it in. I'm not landing that aircraft. I'm just plopping it down, but I can do that if I do that at a hard line. So I'm going to set this aside. Now let's go on and look at what else we can do. What are the woods that we can burn? I suppose my all-time favorite wood probably has to be holly. But holly is one of the harder woods, and I'm just going to turn this over. Holly is one of the more difficult woods to manage to find, and it costs a good bit when you can find it. But now there may be holly that grows naturally in your area. I'm not sure. Here in Central Texas, we do have some actions. We do have some holly trees, and we're able to get our hands on holly from time to time. I'm showing you these two because it's the same pattern, but I want to show you the difference that shading can actually make. Both of these were done with a ball tip writing tip. This one, I just simply drew the pattern on. And for some of you might say, well, there it is. That's all we have to do. But now we've added a little bit of shadow. And this, we're borrowing this from the art world. And let's sort of look at this. I have one petal on top and one petal underneath. Now, when the light is shining down from above here, we're creating a bit of a shadow on the petal or the leaf that's underneath. And the way that we do that in art is by floating in a little bit of a shadow. So if these petals were, say, red, then I would take a little bit of red, and then I might take a bit of brown or a bit of pain gray if we're using watercolors. I'm going to literally float in a tiny little shadow line in order to begin creating depth. And hopefully you can see all around these little leaves that are on the bottom, they all have a bit of a shadow on them. Now, how do I create the highlight? I really like doing pyrography patterns that don't use color at all. We'll just say the black and white of the pyrography, but I also like to use some highlights. And I use these simple colored pencils. I think this one is a Derwent brand. The Derwent brands are kind of nice because the lead in the Derwent is larger than they are in the Prismacolors or in the other colored pencils. But white is white is white. And so Prisma, Derwent, both of those are fine. Now, I've already colored some of these in white, but let's just sort of see what a huge difference highlighting. Now, petals as well as leaves have lines in them. So I'm not going to draw circles here. I'm not drawing circles because within the petal, there are little lines. So I'm starting out at the end where the light is going to be the strongest, and then I'm pulling that stroke toward the center in a linear fashion. And look at what a difference just using the white pencil begins to make. Let me just pull another piece. Well, we're in the middle of talking about wood. So let me go ahead and finish talking about some of the woods that you might be able to use and the way that they create different effects. Now this one, the wood itself is a box elder, and it doesn't have the pink in it. There was a tiny bit of pink right there, but it does have some nice figuring in it. But let's look at this particular design. Rather than outlining the flowers, creating a very harsh look, I penciled the flowers and the two little leaves in, but then I used my spoon shader, and ever so lightly on a low setting, I literally shadowed around the petals and the leaves, and then ever so slight shadowing inside the flowers here to create a very, very subtle look on this particular piece. Now, I did come back in and use my white pencil to add some highlights. And then you can barely see a little bit of veining in both the leaves and the petals. And with a very, very low temperature setting on the ball tip, I added that veining. So another kind of a technique in creating a more subtle design. And this again is box elder, a soft wood, but boy, it burns beautifully. Hard maple.
Janice, when you have a pattern on the wood and you've
Yes.
got pencil graphite on there, can you talk a little bit about, is there any issue with shading over pencil graphite versus just shading raw wood?
Yes. Now, whenever I'm drawing a pattern onto wood, and let's just put down, I'm just going to give you a pattern here for an example. Well, here, let's just do it. And I'm just going to draw one leaf, and I'm going to press pretty hard on this. And then here are those little balls, the little berries, and then here's one of the Christmas balls. Okay. Now then, I've got a good bit of graphite on the wood now. If I don't burn exactly on that line, then I'm going to have to make sure that I can erase that graphite. And is that going to create a problem with shading? Well, let me get back a ball tip in here, and let's just see what happens. Now, I always keep a scrap of wood right by my burner, and I never touch the real pattern until I've touched my scrap to see where I am with my temperature setting. I have to tell you about this. I was doing a demonstration for the Houston Club, and my good friend and mentor had some words to say about how I was cleaning my brush. Using my brush to clean the tip. I had this clamped onto the side of the table, and I would go over every now and then, and I would clean it, and I would burn, and I would clean, and I would burn. And afterward, he said, that was a whole lot of wasted motion that you just now showed us. So he went down and bought a plastic Harbor Freight brush, got some Velcro out of his wife's sewing kit, put it together, and said, here, now when you're burning, you can just do this and you don't waste all that energy. It was intended as a joke, but do you know what? I use this thing all the time now. It really, really does work. And I thank him for playing that joke on me. Okay, so here we are back again. I'm testing how much burn I've got before I go over to my wood. Now, I'm going to have to be awfully careful here Now, oops, I didn't get it on the line. I got out of the way here. And here, before I did some shadowing, oh dear, I got out of the way again. That graphite is going to interfere with the pyrography. If I don't get rid of that graphite, it's going to discolor the wood burning, the shading of the wood burning. So what I like to do is and we're going to talk about erasers now, because we're going to use or look at 3 different kinds that you might want to look at. A regular old art eraser will work, and I'll take my eraser and I will literally erase as much of the graphite as I can so that I only barely see the pattern. And boy, I can see it, but I've really erased quite a bit of it. Now, let me turn it this way. Tombow makes a couple of erasers that I really have gotten to like here. This plastic eraser by Tombow is such a nice soft eraser that I can come back and it does a really nice job of erasing most of my graphite lines. If that doesn't work quite as well as I needed it to, then Tombow also makes this mono eraser. It has sand in it, sand and rubber eraser. And because it's got a bit of abrasive, I can really get down and scrub that line completely away with this eraser. Now, if for some reason I still can't quite get rid of it all, then I'll go back with my sandpaper. I think this is the 400 grit. And then I can completely get rid of the graphite. So yes, if I'm going to be creating a shadow, and I'm doing a little scrubbing here, then I do want to get rid of that graphite before I start creating my shading, because it will cause that to look more gray instead of the brown that we get from a burn. Hopefully that kind of answered that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. Now then, let's see, where are we now? Woods. We're talking about woods. Poplar. And I put these 2 down together because both of these are poplar. And the grain in poplar is fairly pronounced. And so why not just take advantage of the grain? On this one, I've used just the black and white technique, using the white to highlight. On this one, I've used color, but notice I've also used white to highlight. And creates, I think, a little better, well, it just makes it have a bit more depth. And if you look real closely, you can follow the grain and the pattern. Here's this pattern right here. And we're going to follow the grain all the way around to the back side. And the same thing on this one. We can pick out the pattern, and yet I'm going to follow the grain around to the front side. So on some pieces, now of course this works a whole lot better perhaps for wood turners than for wood carvers, because I'm literally using the grain to define the pattern. These are Zentangle inspired patterns. And I also like to decorate the little beads as well. So with my pyrography. So poplar is a fine wood to turn. And I'm going to show you a large poplar piece in just a moment. Then this one is Bradford pear. This is cross grain Bradford pear. And you can see that the burn on it is going to be a lot more subtle than the burn will be on a lighter color wood. I have burned mesquite. I have burned walnut. I will tell you that if you're burning walnut or mesquite, you just can't put any kind of a finish, not even a fixative or a lacquer on top of them, because you'll almost completely lose the burn design. I didn't happen to bring any of the walnut or mesquite that I burned, but well, the pattern is just going to be a lot more dark. It's just
Looks
going to
like
be
leather.
dark. I have had people say it does look like leather. And yes, I do burn leather a little bit. I just didn't happen to bring any leather pieces with me this evening because we're basically talking about wood this evening. But yes, it does kind of look like a piece of leather. So let me show you this poplar bowl. Then we may zoom out just a tad. You can really see the grain on the back side. And this is some of the white poplar. And I will go to the Hardwood Lumber Company here in Houston, and I'll go through all of their poplar. And when I find a piece of white poplar, that's the one I have the guys pull out for me. This particular piece of poplar, I combined, get that a little bit out of the way. I used a black and white technique, very, very, very dark background, and then a whole lot of different temperature settings throughout in order to create different patterns in the wood, different flower designs in the wood. And again, these are more fantasy flowers and fantasy leaves instead of terribly realistic. And then the white colored pencil in order to highlight the tips of the petals or parts of the petals. And you can see that white really showing up. So,
Do you
all
put
right.
lacquer? Do you put lacquer over the white so it doesn't come off?
Do you know what I first of all, I use fixative. I use the artist fixative. And if you're familiar with that, if you're an artist and you're doing pastels or charcoal, then it literally fixes the medium from smudging. And so once I put my fixative down, and I'll usually put several coats, 3, maybe 4, then I can come back with just a couple of light sprays of lacquer. And now the inside of this bowl and the outside, I've sanded to 600, but I only sanded this to 320. I have found that if I'm burning the wood, I need a little bit of tooth in the wood to really take the burn well. And I prefer to stop at 320. Now, if I'm still seeing some scratches or little tool marks, I may go to 400 or even 600, but then I'll come back and lightly touch it with my 320 to give it some tooth and open up those pores, particularly if I'm going to use color. If I've gone up to 600, I've sealed the little cells of the wood, and it's not going to absorb that color nearly as well. One thing too that I wanted to mention about using markers is that markers are, you can see the wood grain through markers, but not through the newer metallic markers. They are opaque, and you don't see the wood grain if you're using the metallic markers. So you'll have to try, if you're going to use them, then use them in very special places, especially if you're wanting the grain of the wood to show through.
Are there certain woods that that smoke from the wood is more dangerous than others? Like is basswood or pine an issue with the smoke?
Softer woods, no. They're all, if you're burning hot, they're all going to smoke. And certainly some woods may create some sensitivities in some people. If you're burning mesquite, I know some people have trouble with mesquite. And if you are burning mesquite, you're going to need the fan sucking it away. You're going to need a ventilator on. At the very least, an RZ mask. Are you familiar? I didn't bring my RZ mask. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
RZ comes with different filters, and it looks a whole lot like one of the what are those COVID masks that everybody said you had to have, the
Like a
something.
95 or something.
Yes, the 95, except my RZ mask is black. You can also get them in colors. You can also buy them now at Lowe's. And when I bought mine, I think I paid about $50 for it, and it came with several filters that you put inside it. I use it for my wood turning. And if I'm going to be doing some heavy duty burning with a lot of smoke, then I'm going to put it on just to protect myself.
And softwoods will give you a lot of smoke, right?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Softwoods like basswood smoke a lot.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And there's a chat question, and that is?
I think it was the same thing with
Oh.
any issues with burning basswood or soft pine.
I love to burn basswood. The grain is very nice to burn. Just turn your temperature setting down. And if you're doing artistic burning, you're not going to get a lot of smoke anyway. So yes, if you're dealing with soft woods, you can burn at a much lower temperature than if you're dealing with hard maple.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's see. We've already talked about don't breathe the smoke. Turning the work instead of your hand when possible. We talked about that. I'm just going over some of the little tips. And we mentioned don't change the tip unless you turn your machine off. Storing your tips. It's a good idea to keep these little containers that your tips come in and store those tips in these little containers, because if you've got them all jumbled up in a box here, they are subject to breakage. So go ahead, keep your little containers and store those in those little containers. Make sure that you turn off. One thing, these machines don't come with an automatic shut off. And I really need to talk to all the wood burning people and say, if there's no activity, we really probably would like to have them shut off after what, say 10 minutes or so, because the telephone will ring and you'll start talking and get distracted, and you'll look over and that little red light is shining. We talked a bit about applying patterns, but Roger, you had some, now of course yours was Basket of Illusion, but let's talk a bit about, well, okay, let's talk about applying a pattern to something that has a curved surface and how you can do that. And I'm going to get out a couple of my patterns here. Those of you that are somewhat familiar with sewing know what darts do. When you cut darts or when you sew darts in fabric, then you're creating a sewn line that gathers up the fabric in order to make it fit around the form of the body. If you're doing a skirt and you want it to fit over the lady's hips, then you can sew some darts and it will begin to mold around the curve of the hips. It's the same thing. Now, there's no scientific way that I'm now cutting some of them an inch apart, an inch and a half apart. I'm just periodically cutting a dart. So let's sort of begin to see what I think I'm going to have a sip of water here. Yeah. So what happens when I begin to take that little dart up? And I'm hoping you can see what happens. Can you see what's beginning to happen there? How it's beginning to create a curve?
Yeah.
So if I were putting this onto my hollow form, say, then I'm going to get my little bit of blue tape here. And I'll get a couple of pieces going. Let's just get a couple of little pieces of blue tape. And hopefully you'll get the gist of it. I'm going to start in the center, or as close to the center as I can. Tape that one down. Tape that one down. Oops. I think I need another dart. There we go. Tape that one down and so on around. Now, before I tape the bottom, I'm going to take my little piece of graphite. Oh, I had a little piece of, there it is.
Question,
Yes.
is it practical to wood burn an eye for an animal or character other than carving it, rather than carving it?
I do burn the eyes on the ones that I've done. Yes. Now, I have to admit that mine were on a flat piece of wood though, so I didn't have the option of carving. So I'm not sure I can answer that. I'm not sure I can answer that question properly. Again, I'm not specifically a wood carver. And I certainly, the carving I do is all power carving, and I'm mostly doing relief carving, leaves and flowers and things of that sort. So I'm not sure.
The question for everyone else was, is it better to burn an eye with pyrography or carve an eye, basically? And but I think you answered it quite well. It works for you, I think.
If it's on flat wood, I'm going to burn it. If it's
Yeah.
a carving that's completely an animal that's carved all the way around, I'm going to carve it. Yeah.
There's another question about the names of the two different colored pencils you prefer. I just want to remind everyone that she put a rather comprehensive document together that I'll put on the website tomorrow. If
Okay.
it's not already on there, that you can download. It talks about the different machines, and a lot of the things that she mentioned tonight is in that document. So
Right.
send that out to everybody.
Yes, the pencils that I use are Prisma and Derwent. Now, let me tell you about the Derwent pencils. For those of you who do animals, and of course, now I draw, and I use a lot of colored pencil, but I draw a lot on black paper. And Derwent puts together a package of about 6 colored pencils that are all the shades that you need for almost every animal imaginable. I've done lions, gorillas, orangutans, leopards, all using this one package of Derwent colored pencils. They are an excellent pencil. And if you're thinking of adding, I mean, I know that a lot of you are painting, but remember, I use colored pencil on my wood as well. And then I can blend it with my blenders. So that's just something that you might want to experiment with a little bit. All right. So now I've got my curved surface. Now I'm going to slide my graphite paper up under, and then I'll begin the process of closing up the circle down, or closing up the pattern down at the bottom. Then I'll get my pencil and I'll trace over. Now, obviously, because I've got some little bumps in the paper here, all the little lines may not line up exactly, so that when I take all this off, I may have to come back with my pencil and reconnect some of the lines, or literally draw in. So one method of putting a pattern onto a curved surface. Another method of putting a pattern onto a curved surface is just simply to wad up the paper. Now, when I begin to unwad that paper, can you see that there's a bit of a curve there? And I literally can then do the same thing by adding my graphite paper, just sliding it up underneath, taping it down, and then trace through just by doing the wadding technique. When I remove it, I've got the same situation that I may have to go back and use my pencil to sort of fill in some of the little lines. Now, I wanted to show you this because this is branding, and we haven't talked about, can you make your own burning tips? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can. Some of you may already be familiar with making your own burning tips out of nichrome wire. Nichrome, Nichrome. The two gauges that I like best if I'm making my own tips are the 20 and the 18. If you get into the 22 gauge, it's a little bit flimsy. And I've made a few different, I was really just taken away by the basket. And I just had to make a whole bunch of these little basket tips. That one is made out of 18, 20, and this is 22, and it's just real flimsy. But I made myself a little shader, and I literally took my ball peen hammer, shaped my shader, and I'll put it right down there, and then took my little ball peen hammer and I hammered it to flatten it out to create a shader. I made myself a bent wire to use as a writing tip, and then I made a couple of different brands, and this is one of them. Now, the process, if you're going to use nichrome wire, is you're going to take the wire and you're going to shape it however you want to shape it, be it in a bent wire, a shader, a brand, a basket weave. If you're going to do a basket weave, you can just wrap the wire around. A nail is okay, but probably around the end of a drill bit gives you a more perfectly round surface to use. So that probably would be a better option. Then you're going to put that wire. Well, let me just show you. Let me just show you this. Coalwood actually has come out with, there's no tip here. There's no tip here. It just has little holes in it. And so you can take your little homemade nichrome wires. I should put my glasses on so I can probably see what I'm doing. Okay. And I just shove it right in there. I don't even have to solder that into place. Now let me plug it in. And then the next step is to turn your burner all the way up so that this wire glows cherry red. I'm not going to do that now because this has already been annealed and I don't want to mess it up. But you turn it up to cherry red and then immediately turn it right back down again and let it cool. That anneals the wire, and now you can use it at your regular temperature setting. And let's see what we can do with. Let's just see how this little fellow might work for us. Oh, not hot yet. I'm creating a good bit of smoke here, so I think I'm going to have to do some adjusting on my wires to get them back in or back even again. But there you go. You can create actually your own little brands if you want to, your own little designs. If they get too terribly complicated, they're a little flimsy. You know, I mean, if you get them too complicated, but they're still kind of a lot of fun. Now, it seems that all of the major manufacturers now have heard people say, I want a basket weave. So coal wood now makes a basket weave tip. And so does razor tip, and so does Burn Master. If you're doing fish scales, then you can get this sort of a little part of a circle here to create little fish scales or dragon scales. Circles, if you just don't think you can draw circles, then you can actually get this circle one. But let me tell you, don't even waste your money. It takes so long to heat up that much metal and then hold it down to burn a pattern. You can draw with your ball tip, you can draw 5 circles in the same time that it takes you to do one of these. And if you practice a little bit, you'll be able to make those circles just as perfectly as if you had this little guy. Okay.
Janice?
Yes, sir.
Janice, do we have on
Yeah.
time to do a simple demonstration of what you mean by blending?
Blending, yes, indeed. All right. Let me just get these out of the way here. Let's look at, well, let's see. Let me get a couple of different colors here. And then let me get my blender. I'm going to go ahead. I like these new markers. They're just so much better than the old markers used to be. The new, and you can see some of mine are really old and they just keep working. So I keep using them. But the new ones have these little brushes on them. And so you can lay down color and you can just get right up into little corners, which is just very nice. You can just handle these markers just like a paintbrush. Now I'm going to go over and I'm going to borrow some of that darker color. And I'm using my lighter color to kind of go in and borrow some of the darker color. I can actually come along and use my regular blender now. And I can borrow one color and pull it into the other using my blender. So I started out fairly green here, but I've been able to blend into the yellow. Now, one thing about using your blender, see how we got a lot of color on the end of it? So on your scrap wood, you always want to clean your blender off, or else you'll make a big mess. Now oh, here it is. The next time you try to put the blender down. Let's look at some colored pencils too. Let's see here. Well, let's just sort of see what this does. I've got a dark green and then a lighter green. And let me see if I even have a lighter one yet. I'm not sure if this one's going to be even lighter yet. A little bit lighter. And let's see what we can do with blending these. I'm going to start in my dark. And I'm going to pull that color into the lighter area. And clean it
Does
off.
that work with both water-based and acrylics?
When I'm using acrylics, I thin my acrylics down. I don't use them full strength. Now, the old acrylics, of course, were opaque. And I wanted more of a wash instead of a paint. So I literally would thin my acrylics down with water. And then I'm just simply using water to blend. And you know what? Okay. let me just draw a leaf here. Uh, hmm. Let's say that I'm wanting to, have several colors, like a little bit of red and a little bit of yellow and a little bit of orange on my fall leaf. I've used the pyrography, and one of you already mentioned that by using pyrography, I'm closing up the little cells of the wood to prevent the color from bleeding out into the rest of the wood. So I've used my pyrography. Then I'm going to take in order to blend my colors here, if I'm using thinned acrylic, I'm going to come along with a paintbrush. This is my paintbrush, dipping it in water. And now I'm going to wet the whole leaf with water. And the pyrography is going to hold that water into the leaf and not let it bleed out past. Now I'm going to pick up my colors. I'm going to pick up my red, and I'm simply going to just drop it in the places where I want to drop it in. I'm going to pick up my orange. I'm going to drop that in. I'm going to pick up my yellow, and I'm going to drop that in. I'm going to clean my brush, wet my brush with clean water, and now I'm going to start blending. And I'm going to blend that color that's been dropped into a wet area. I'm just going to blend with water. Now, you and I both know that that's going to raise the grain of the wood. So the step I'm going to use before I even put any water on this wood at all is I'm going to spritz this wood with a little spray bottle and water. I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to sand off the little fuzzies. Now, when I add the acrylic, I'm not going to get any raised grain because I've already raised the grain of the wood once. So now the newer acrylics that you can buy, you can get the transparent acrylics. They're a little bit more limited in color, but of course, if you buy the 3 main colors, you can mix any color you want. And I've only just begun using the transparent acrylics, but they look like they're going to be a little bit of fun because they're letting that wood grain show right through. And so I may use those a little bit more now than just the thinning out of the old opaque acrylics that I used to have to do. Okay. Now then, we've applied patterns. Oh, goodness gracious. Where are we? Here we are. I just realized I made a horrible mistake, and I have to somehow try to correct that mistake. That line was not even supposed to be there. So I'm going to get my knife out, and I happen to use one of these wallpaper knives that you just keep breaking them off and then you get a new blade. A pocket knife or any kind of a sharp knife will work. And I'm going to start scratching at that mistake that I've made. And it can be shading. I can actually create, just with the point of my knife, some little designs in the wood as well, where if I've shaded dark. But now, if I'm trying to get rid of this line because it doesn't belong here, I'm going to scratch the line, and then I'm going to scratch each side of it so that I don't just have a divot. Can we see that that's gone now? Then I'm going to go through my grits. If I started with 120, I'm going to do 120. Then I'm going to jump over here to 180. I'm going to flip to 220. And then I'm going to end with 320. Because remember, I said I like to still have a little bit of tooth. Now the mistake is gone, or it's almost gone enough that I can continue now putting the line or the design where I need it to be. So that's one good way of correcting mistakes. Now, I didn't bring a bottle of 91% proof alcohol. But every now and then you'll have that little bit of a brown overburn. If you've got that brown overburn, you can get your 91 alcohol and a little bit of a cotton cloth, and you can wipe that and it will take most of it off. If you can't get all of it off, then go back to your 400 or your 600 sandpaper, and you can sand that last little bit off. And because you're using one of the finer grits, you're actually not hurting the pyrography. You're not getting into the pyrography pattern itself, but usually the alcohol will take that overburn off.
Can I ask you what the,
Yes, ma'am.
when you first showed us all of the tips at the beginning, the very last one you said that, I believe, was it a J?
Yes, let's put that one in.
Oh, okay, because, yeah, I was curious about that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Huh. It would help if I plugged it in. Okay. Well, okay, I'll use this so that we can get a comparison to what it looks like with the others. And I'm just always touching my wood, my waste wood, to see how much burn I have. So let's sort of see what a J-tip will do for us. I'm going straight across the grain, and look what a nice even, no bumps, just like the skew. But unlike the skew, because it's rounded on the end, I'm not getting that big overburn that I would get when I put the whole skew down. And sometimes it's a little hard to know that you're just putting down 1/4 of the tip of the skew, not the whole skew. But with this, no matter how you hold it in your hand, you're still putting the same amount onto the wood. Diagonally, absolutely beautiful. Now you can get right in here and do some really thin little lines. You can really stack these up side by side by side. With the grain, just beautiful. Can you do curves? You can coax. A little bit of a curve out of the J-tip as well. So if you wanted to have a little bit of curve on that feather, you can do that. So I really like the J-tip. I used to use this a whole lot more than I do now. And I'm wondering, why did I quit using this so much? Because it's such a nice, sharp line and a nice crisp line, and it really does close up the cells of the wood very nicely. So that's our J-tip. Did that help?
Yep. Well,
Okay.
it's getting close to your bedtime, I think, out there in Texas.
Yes.
Any other questions for Janice?
I will show you one little thing here, and it's 2 different leaves, the same thing. I've really outlined this one heavily, and I've a little light shading behind it. I've outlined this one with pencil to start out with, heavy shading on the outside of the leaf. And then every now and then I've just come back and touched those lines a little bit to sort of sharpen them up a bit. The same 2 leaves, the same thing, but two different effects that you can get. One thing about heavy lines like this, think of cartoon characters. Cartoon characters are outlined in black. It gives them a fantasy look. It gives them a make-believe look, not real. If you can create by shade or shadow, it tends to look a little bit more realistic. Okay, so I think that got us through most of it, unless you have another question that I'll be glad to answer or try.
No, I think it was a absolutely great demonstration and very thorough and looked great.
Thank you.
Any other questions for anyone? So
After you've gotten my handout, if you have questions, I've got my email address and probably my phone number on it. Contact me and I will be glad to answer as best as I can any questions that you might still have.
Great.
Very
Thank you.
thorough.
Thanks, George, for volunteering his equipment and location. Good. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming tonight. And hopefully we'll see you in November also. Take care. Thanks again, Janice.
Good night.
That was wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. Terrific job.
We're done.